Hello, and welcome back to our cybersecurity program. In case you didn't attend our earlier session, I'm Sid Snitkin, and I lead our cybersecurity research at ARC. In our first session, we discussed the current situation in industrial cybersecurity and the ways it will need to change to support all the developments occurring in IT and OT today. We concluded with the recommendation that every industrial company should be thinking about converging their IT and OT cybersecurity programs. But we know that this isn't easy, and that every company is going to have to face a unique set of challenges that will constrain what they should be trying to do and how they go about doing it. To help people make these decisions, we included 2 roundtable sessions with end users from different industries in our cybersecurity program so that they could share their views, goals, and challenges in this area. The hope is that these peer discussions will give everyone who is watching some insights into what you can do. This is the second roundtable session, and it'll focus on the specific challenges of integrating or converging, IT and OT cybersecurity technologies. Now, before we get to the discussion, I always do this. I want to thank our sponsors again, all of our forum sponsors, and particularly the ones we show on this slide. And I want to encourage everyone to go and visit their booths in the exhibit area. You know, they have a lot of interesting information they can share with you, and I'm sure that they would be happy to discuss your unique security needs. The way you get there, just as in case you don't know, is if you're in the lobby, you click on the little tab at the top that says Exhibit Hall, and then select the one that says Industry Exhibit Hall, because we have several events going, and that's the one you're in right now, is the industry one. Now, to frame today's discussion, let me do a quick recap of my conclusions about IT and OT cybersecurity convergence in our first session. OT and IT people have long recognized the need for cybersecurity, and I think they've done their best to address this issue. At least a lot of them have, particularly in the process industries, I might say. But not surprisingly, the differences in technologies and goals led to the 2 separate programs that you see on the left side of this slide. Today, you know, more sophisticated attackers and new developments are forcing both the IT and the OT to expand their programs significantly. That's the colored part of that 45 record you see there. And this is to include a much broader set of assets, people, and business processes. And companies are already starting to recognize that IT and OT cybersecurity convergence is a good opportunity, might provide a good way to address these challenges. And so for most companies, the question today is not whether they should be converging these programs, but how they can make this transition and what they should target as an end game for their converged programs. And that's the goal of these roundtable discussions. And before I let our panelists, the distinguished set of speakers here, or panelists, make their comments, I always want to take the floor first. And let me kick off the discussion with just some of ARC's views on these topics, on these issues, or suggestions, I would say. The first suggestion we would make is that you've got to start with understanding a clear idea of what's driving the need to make this change, because, you know, that's one way to help to explain why you're doing things to other people. Here are some typical kinds of reasons that we hear from our clients. You know, there are facilities that simply lack the funds to address the critical OT cybersecurity resource gaps that they have. And convergence offers an effective way to kind of gain the experienced cyber experts that are in the IT group. Most IT cyber programs lack the people and technologies to manage the sophisticated attacks that are occurring today. And many IT programs have SOCs or some form of that are already built to provide active defenses. And you can take advantage of that. CISOs are demanding consistent cybersecurity management across all systems today. And IT already has the policies and processes that are already set to meet these needs. And they may be different than yours, but you could probably have to conform to that anyhow. And then digital transformation is really going to require people to have end-to-end cybersecurity for all their business processes. IT and OT cybersecurity convergence can help you get to that point and ensure that you're there with centralized policy management, integrated threat information, and technology that supports fast and efficient cross-domain incident management. Now, the second point I'd make is to establish the goal for your program. You know, that's one of the words, there's a lot of trite words today, or words that are used, same words used for everything today. And convergence is a word that I find people don't seem to like in this area, or when I use it a lot, because I mean combining, but people say I'd rather use collaboration or integration or whatever. But just to try to put a framework here, I've kind of come up with this little model. This is Sid Smithkin's view. It doesn't have to be everybody's. But I see three different types of programs that people are doing. On the left, there's one I would call collaboration, which is you have the two separate programs, but you kind of expand the collaboration that was always there. In the past, the two, IT and OT, would always have to work together on the interfaces between the two. But this is a little bit more collaboration to try to deal with things, maybe more DMZ issues and things like that. But you still have two separate groups, separately managed, separate set of people, processes, and technologies. The next kind of thing some people are doing, and I think it's going the next step, is where you say, okay, this collaboration, we're going to make it even more, because we're trying to deal with those issues that are in that 45 disk there, the colored stuff that's overlapping, dealing with things like cloud, with mobile devices, with remote access, with IoT cybersecurity. Those are common problems between IT and OT. And companies are recognizing that they need one common solution to that. And that's kind of that type of thing where they're integrating, and the extent that they integrate varies, of course, but that's more integration. It's more extensive kind of bringing together. And then you have on the right something I might call unification, where somebody says, well, okay, we're just going to have one big program. We're going to use common technology where it makes sense, but it's going to be managed by one person or one organization, where it still recognizes that there's unique IT issues and OT issues, and it's more that you take the resources, combine them all together, and then start assigning based on special capabilities and things like that. And if you look at below that, I have that little bar. I think where you see that being used is, you know, the one on the left, if you really don't have a big convergence driver, then, you know, you might be able to get by with that, where the issue is more isolation than it is convergence. Where if you go across to the right, as convergence grows, you need to think more about unification. And I think what I hear and what I see is that companies are probably going to need a blend of all these approaches in their program. They're going to have to consider all those things. But the point here was just to understand where you're trying to go with the program. And then the third kind of suggestions we would have is that you kind of start off when you do that with some guiding principles. And by that, I have three listed here. First, that IT and OT cybersecurity are equally important. Very often we see different groups saying how their issues are more important than the other issues. But the real fact of the matter, even though if you lose a plant, you certainly lose an awful lot. But if you lose a business system, you likewise lose a lot. And we've seen lots of examples of companies that can't operate and have taken enormous losses when what was compromised was their IT system, not their OT. So both are important. The second thing is that IT-OT cybersecurity convergence is more than just shifting OT cybersecurity to IT cyber teams. You know, OT cybersecurity is a unique problem. It's always going to need special people, processes, and technologies to deal with that. And then the last point I would make is that IT and OT cybersecurity convergence has to be flexible. And it was based kind of, this is a follow-up on this previous slide where I said, I think you have to realize that you're going to need different kinds of answers for different situations. Someone mentioned yesterday in our panel discussion yesterday, and I think it's completely true, is a lot of companies have a real variety of the kind of facilities they have. Some of them can almost operate purely with isolation, just being managed by their IT people. Other ones are going to have extensive digital transformation and things like that that's going to force them to do much more convergence. We're going to now go to the panel session itself, and we have 5 panelists with us, 5 distinguished people, I will say, who have agreed to participate here. They're all end users. You'll start to see them probably showing up on the screens. I don't know. I have to do that myself here in a minute. But we have Jeff Aiken, who's a senior automation security engineer from BASF Corporation. We have Eric Devoy, who's the principal security architect from BP. We have Jarrett Lawrence, who's the industrial IT capability technology architect with ExxonMobil. we have Jeff Nalazic, he can correct me if I mispronounced it, who's a level 2 platform systems and cybersecurity expertise leader at Dow. And we have Dan Rosinski. Dan's an ex-Dow employee, and he's now president of Industrial Cybersecurity and Digital Strategy Associates. So with that said, let me stop sharing. And now you'll see all the happy faces here. Okay, hi guys.
Hello, Sid.
All right, what I wanted to do is I wanted to give everybody an opportunity to go through and just kind of say a little more about themselves. So there's bios in the vFairs platform. If you look at it, for every person, if you look on the agenda, you'll see everybody's pretty face. And if you just click on it, it'll get a little background. But, please say a few words and maybe about the topic as well, if you like. So let me start with, I said I would do it in alphabetic order. Jeff Aiken.
Hi, everybody. I am Jeff Aiken. I belong to BASF Corporation. I was hired there in '97, serving various IT roles. In 2008, I took the role of North American firewall management over their firewall infrastructure. Eventually wound up in the global firewall management team. In 27, I joined, or as my manager likes to say, I was poached from IT to OT. To serve on the regional technical expertise group regarding cybersecurity. We often refer that to automation security instead of cybersecurity. And I also fill today other cybersecurity roles regionally and globally. So.
Okay, and who's next? Eric, I think.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
So no, appreciate it. So first, I just want to say thanks to you and ARC. I think these virtual conferences are tough, right? But I think are worth doing. I think it's worth having the conversation. So appreciate you guys moving forward with this. Give me an opportunity to come and talk to you all, I guess. So a little bit about myself. Sid mentioned Eric DeVoy. I'm a principal security architect. My role is focused on securing BP's industrial or automation systems assets globally. Specifically, what I'm responsible for, I guess I like to say, hold the pen for our security strategy and the security architecture that we need to protect all of our automation system sites. So similar to Jeff, when I talk about automation system security, I'm talking about all of our industrial assets, whether those be our refineries, our pipelines, our offshore drilling rigs, terminals, et cetera, but also our renewable energy sites too, like our wind farms, solar power generating facilities and things of that nature. A little bit on my history. I started with Amoco back in the late 90s, so over 20 years in the oil and gas industry. I started off as a software developer or a programmer. Spent a few years doing that, then I actually left BP Amoco at the time and went and did a number of years of consulting, but still focused on oil and gas and delivering software development solutions, integration solutions, working with process control teams to be able to get data from the control systems up to the enterprise to do some analytics, things that people might call industrial IoT type solutions today, but back then we didn't refer to them as industrial IoT, I suppose. And then back in—
I want to fix your headset a little because we keep losing you. Maybe you have to tilt down. I don't know.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't know if that's with everybody. And I apologize. I don't know if you just heard a helicopter go over my house. I happen to live near Quantico, so.
No helicopter.
That was your stomach growling, yeah. So.
Yeah. No, apologies. This headset's the second one in the last 2 weeks that I'm going through, so I'm burning through headsets like crazy. So apologies if I'm not coming through clear. But yeah, when I came back in 2009, I primarily worked for BP in an organization they called Refining Engineering Technology, and this was an organization that was a mix of IT, OT, and what we called ET, or engineering technology, delivering engineering solutions, process safety solutions, and cybersecurity solutions. And then in 2015, I moved to the security architecture team with a primary focus on the cybersecurity aspects of all our industrial control assets, and I've been there ever since. That kind of brings me to where I'm at today, quickly, I suppose, with our overall mission. For those that heard maybe Ian Henderson speak yesterday, I work as part of his overall team, and our overall mission is the safe, reliable, and intelligent operations of our industrial control facilities. safety and reliability have always been paramount to us, and they always will be, but we've had intelligence there as well to recognize that digital is a big part of our business moving forward. There's a big value opportunity there. So how do we recognize that alongside those other priorities as well, and make sure that we put the right security in place to enable our business moving forward? So really looking forward to the conversation today. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Jarrett?
Good afternoon. Jarrett Lawrence, currently the Industrial IT Capability Technology Architect at ExxonMobil. Started about 27 years ago outside of ExxonMobil in the military, and basically got my experience and knowledge starting in information systems and IT, basically in that environment, essentially unclassified, classified systems throughout the Department of Defense and Armed Services. And then after that, another 7 years in the DoD space, working with, a lot of the network security and cybersecurity within the DoD, essentially on the IP networks that they were just, building out and constructing across the globe. And then the last 10 years, I've been with ExxonMobil. I started in the unconventional business line, working within industrial kind of IT spaces, IT within what we call our SCADA or process control networks, providing connectivity, compute, and just IT-based services to that organization. And then lately, in the last 5 years, we had a space created in our IT environment called IT-OT, which we then changed to industrial IT. And I've been focused mainly on integration of technology stacks and solutions with a better cyber focus and how we can deliver, value to our business lines throughout the corporation and the downstream, upstream, midstream value chains that we have in the greater ExxonMobil environment. So happy to be here, glad to be part of this discussion. I think it's a great pillar to add on to yesterday's people and process discussion that I listened to, and I saw Dan and Sid on yesterday. So happy to be here.
Oh, great. Jeff?
Yes, I'm Jeff Nalazic, and I started with Dow back in 1989, so I'm getting close to 32 years with the company. And when I first started with the company, I worked in engineering organization, and Dow still has some proprietary process control equipment. And I worked on the automated testing of that industrial control equipment to make sure delivered quality was being delivered to our Dow facilities for installation. So I did that for about 8 years. Then I transitioned into our IT organization, where I did a lot of local area network design. So I did that for about 4 years. Then transitioned back into engineering because we had a commercial distributed control system that we were standardizing on for a platform and rolling that out globally. So I worked on developing the standards, the automated build tools, the integration methodology, so that we could roll this out repeatedly globally. And then about 3 years ago, I was given the opportunity and the challenge to take some of those skills I learned on that one platform and look at the standardizing of the implementation and the management of cybersecurity controls across all level 2 platforms within Dow. So that's been my primary focus for the last 3 years.
Dan?
Yeah, hello, I'm Dan Brzezinski. I've got about 36 years, it's going on 37 now, in industry. So I've really always worked in the manufacturing technology space. So working with plants and factories to adopt advanced manufacturing technology, mostly in the process industry. As I went through that journey, I'm a chemical engineer, and my first job as a process engineer was at IBM, and it really just perplexed me that I was making computer chips and I had no computer to help me run my process. So I got the bit in my teeth very young that technology was something I wanted as an engineer, and I thought all engineers and operators and maintenance techs and quality analysts should have. So, but I had a kind of a dawning of understanding after 9/11, right, in the early 2000s, that all this technology that I've been, kind of bringing into manufacturing plants had a potential dark side, and that there were people out there that would use that technology that I wanted to, improve plant reliability and safety and, performance capacity. They would use that same technology to try to hurt all those same, kind of targets that I was shooting for. So, for the last 20 years, I've really viewed manufacturing technology as a two-sided coin. One is the side that improves operations, improves safety, improves sustainability. But the other side, which has to come with it, it can't be separate anymore, is the security of those systems. We don't have very many manufacturing plants. I don't think there's probably any left in the world that run manually, completely manually. So there's a system somewhere running a piece of manufacturing equipment or factory equipment, in every plant in the world. And the systems are, have come under attack. So, when we have this discussion, my last 8 years at Dow, I spent combining a role with digital transformation in manufacturing and cybersecurity in manufacturing. And I believe 5 years from now, it may take a little longer, we won't really be talking about cybersecurity necessarily in the OT space as a separate thing, because I believe cybersecurity is going to become a functional requirement for technology that we bring in, and that goes for control technology and vision technology and AI and data analysis. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion today. It's going to be interesting to hear all the perspectives and where people are.
Okay. Now, what we want to do right before we have our discussion, I've got some questions, a lot of questions for you. But we wanted to do a survey of the attendees in the audience just to see maybe what's going on in the rest of the world outside of your businesses. So, Eddie, for the first poll, then we'll get some comments.
Sure.
So everybody can unmute. I see a lot of mutes there. I mean, you're welcome to keep muted as you like, but I want you to feel free to just comment. Everybody I'm sure is very respectful, so you're not going to step on another person's comment, but feel free to just, make comments when you see them. All right, this is the one where, why might you consider convergence of your IT and OT cybersecurity technology stacks? And this, we asked a similar question yesterday, but it was quite different with respect to this, because I think the issues are different. Here, the most popular thing here, and it always shows up as red. You have to scroll down if you're looking at this. They say they're not considering doing anything that way. Does that surprise you guys or not? That surprises me. I would think maybe it's because I'm an analyst and I see a lot of benefits in converging IT and OT. You have to scroll down if you're looking at the poll yourself.
That's 2%, right, Sid?
Yeah, I think that's 2.
No, I'm sorry. No. Then the big one it's the one above that. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes more sense to me.
Yeah.
Concerned about the ability of conventional OT cybersecurity technologies to support end-to-end security of applications and so on, which that is one I would have personally picked, but I don't know if that's what you guys, if a lot of this I think deals with this generic topic of digital transformation. Different companies call that different thing, digitization. I call it digital transformation, and it's not just putting devices, but it's really moving apps to clouds and connecting all kinds of things. So, and then the second one, it says concern about managing security gaps between IT and OT. And then the third highest is the concern about the ability of conventional OT cybersecurity technology to deal with new security challenges of cloud, which is kind of like the one down at the bottom. Anybody want to comment on that?
Pretty good distribution across all of them, though, I would say, Sid. When I look at this question, and it's kind of good that you can select more than one answer, because the main thing for me is, I think with convergence, you can do better, right? You can get to better outcomes. At BP, diversity and inclusion's really big for us, and it's not just because it's the right thing to do. It's with a diverse mindset, diverse way of thinking, you get better outcomes, right? And I think, for me, that is the main thing. It's we'll get to a better answer with a converged mindset at least, and I think that's why it kind of shows. All of these things are important when I look at the results, I guess.
Did the rest of you feel that way? Any other?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think as we connect more and more things, as we bring more technology, whether they're the same between IT or OT, but as we bring more technology into just the OT space in general, and it's connected to more things in the enterprise network, you know, there's just more and more kind of threat vectors that can be taken advantage of. And I think to that point Eric made was, you know, all ideas should be shared between the boundary to make sure that we're not excluding something just because the idea wasn't, or the thought or the solution wasn't created on the other side of the boundary. So I think the more we can kind of test each other a little bit, the better resolve and the better solutions and strategies that we can come up with to kind of solve the big problems that we need to solve moving, you know, not just today, but into the future.
Anyone else, or do you guys kind of agree with those comments, or just don't have a comment?
So I tend to agree as well. You know, part of some of the advantages you can get is, for example, we have a security operations center, and if we can get some of the alerts and you know, some of the detections in our manufacturing environment into a SOC where that's, you know, they're already doing that job. You don't have to create your own on the OT side. So there's definitely an advantage of taking advantage of some of the existing IT technology and doing some of that integration.
Yeah, and also making sure that the IT guys that typically manage the SOC understand the technology. Doesn't do much good if they don't understand it. So
You're saying if you're going to let the SOC do something, they better know what they're doing.
yeah,
I mean,
regarding OT,
yeah.
because it's such a different animal.
Yeah, I mean,
IT.
I would say that knowing the difference between something that's supporting a safety system or a process system as opposed to, you know, just an access point in a carpeted area or something, or some other other technology that may not be as hypercritical. We can't have the same SLA for both, and we have to have a little more diligence and understanding of the environment that we're supporting.
You know, I don't know if you all watched Ian Henderson's presentation yesterday, but he had this example that he had that where he made the point, because he started in refineries and instrumentation and stuff and work, and then he got moved over to the IT group, which he thought was a real step down. He didn't like that, I guess, and he thought he was there to teach them a lot of stuff, and he found out they knew a lot of stuff and things. But he had a slide where he made a point, and he had a picture there of a trading floor. That was what he explained what it was. You know, it was a picture of a guy sitting at a desk with all these screens. And he was talking about response times to deal with things, because, you know, in the OT world, one of his complaints is if something goes wrong, it might take forever to get a response. But in the IT world, you need the response. And he's saying both cases, you need the same kind of seriousness and understanding of the problem and things like that. Can you show us the next survey? Sorry, Dan. We're on the second poll, Dan. But anyhow, where does IT-OT Cybersecurity Technology Convergence offer the best opportunities to improve your security? And, you know, here I tried to break it down by the way we look at technologies: endpoint protection or network security or detection and response, cybersecurity management, and remote access control. And I'm very interested that the one that had the highest amount was cybersecurity management solutions, because I'm a big proponent of that kind of stuff. I don't know if you hear my little presentations, but one thing we see is, you know, every plant needs people. You know, that's a given kind of a problem. But one of the things people can do to help that is to at least make sure they have the tools they need to be able to do what they have to do. And that's kind of what those products are. I don't know if the people who selected that realize that's specifically it, but managing vulnerabilities, managing privileges, having good asset inventories and stuff like that. Is that what you guys see? I mean, do you kind of see it that way? And then the last on the list, I think, well, remote access seems funny that it's so low to me. I'm not surprised by endpoint protection being low. Anybody want to comment?
It's Eric. Happy to comment. I think remote access does seem kind of low to me. I mean, you know, those that seem you know, the Tampa water facility hack that was just announced yesterday, right? I think, you know, it's not just remote access in my mind. It's what we call privileged remote access. You know, so there's a difference between these things. It's, you know, getting to a certain system that's not a high risk is one thing, but if you're allowing change of set points and things like that, that's privileged remote access, and you want to have some strict control on that. It doesn't seem it was the case there, and definitely not something you would see over at my company, I suppose.
That's the term I use, but I mean what you said. But the
Yep.
term I use when I talk about is remote access control, which well, I usually use industrial in front of everything, but it's got exactly that issue where you're very constrained on what person can get access to. It's got to do with that.
Yeah, but we have to remember too what we're asking people. It's not what's the most important, you know, OT cybersecurity issue, right? It's where would convergence help the most. So, you know, it could be that folks feel like they have a pretty strong approach, right, to remote access in their OT platforms already. So, you know, that's
Very good
we
point.
can discuss that from a technology point of view, right? So, yeah.
Do you guys have good remote access, do you think, in yours? Enough with the proper thing? I don't want to open the door for someone to attack you because you say no, ours is we have much up to that. But
I think I think we have a mature remote access capability. I would say that with any technology or any strategy you have, you're always trying to get a little better in it. The privileged ID part, right? The multi-factor, you know, some folks may be a little bit further along in that journey than others. And then so I think that continuous improvement, right? We want to try to at least improve the process and the technology as best we can without adding any more risk or any more kind of vulnerabilities to the environment. So I'd say that from my perspective, I think we have a pretty robust capability, but, you know, as threat actors and even just general kind of patching and hygiene of the systems, you know, degrades based on the vendor themselves that you may be using, you kind of have to kind of try to keep it. I don't want to know if evergreen's going to ever be possible, but at least appropriately improved upon.
I can't see. I got to close this down so I can see everybody.
Yeah. And I know, Jeff, I know you and I have had lots of discussions about when you have multiple platforms, OT platforms, like major platforms, multiple plants that have different automation or control systems, the remote control issue becomes more complicated, right?
So yeah, so one of the challenges in Dow we have is we have, I'd say 5 major level 2 platforms. And then we have everyone else that we call the stray cats and the stray dogs that you're trying to standardize, which is very difficult. And as far as remote access goes, these things all tend to vary based on the platform. So, and I won't call out vendors, but in vendor A over here, we use a certain remote access solution. And in vendor B, we have yet another one. And then in vendor C, you know, they have a concept called chaperoned remote access when it's privileged, which means someone in the plant and the support person have to coordinate that connection. Chaperone meaning the person in the plant can watch and interact, and you know, the remote person is just not making changes on their own.
Maybe that's one reason it's low though too, in the sense that, you know, the stuff you see a lot for remote access in IT, I think, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, there's RDP. I mean, you know, it's just the IT guy taking control of your PC, and that probably works. And maybe there's a lot of privileges he needs to get access to do that in the system. But then when he actually comes in and does it, and when I talk to people in the plants, they're saying, no. A lot of them have things, you know, like you just mentioned, the chaperone thing, or you go there, you got very restricted privileges on, because of this thing, you have to let the vendors in to maintain their equipment. And I guess in that case, you want to give them that kind of capability, but in the others, you don't. And maybe that's why someone's saying, no, we don't want to converge with that kind of a solution. We maybe need the opposite kind of solution, which maybe is not appropriate for IT. I don't know, but so that might be something. So maybe that answer is not odd at all. Maybe it makes sense. What about, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So just last point on the remote access. What we found helpful is we really had to break that down into what it really means. So we start talking about remote access as remote monitoring, remote maintenance, remote engineering, and remote operations, right? And so when we start looking at it with those different lenses, you could then start to match what kind of capability you need to support those different types of functions. What we found is everyone just says remote access, and they're talking about different things. So, you know, we came up with some different language, and I think that helped us quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Eric, because your remote access to an engineering system is much different than your remote access to production.
That's right. Yeah.
Yep, right on.
And I would agree, and I would also add on that to say it, you know, the personas of who's using that, each one of those per se, where are they at? Are they, you know, are they a third party that they have a system that they have in that environment, or are they someone who's above site? I think the personas fit in there too as well, and you have to make sure that that solution is adequately capable as well as secure, based on whether that's the chaperoning or recording of a session, or, you know, when they can grab those credentials and audit, and who can approve it. So I think all of that kind of comes into play into that statement that Eric made too as well.
What about in the detection and response type of stuff, the network security? You know, that's one area, I'll state my, you know, when I talk to companies and things, I mentioned this yesterday. The impression I get is the tools, the security solutions that are used in IT, particularly by IT SOCs and things like that, are much more sophisticated, I would say, than what's used in the plant. Maybe it's the constraints that keep it from being used. I would say that's probably why they're not being used as, you know, everybody wants to do passive monitoring and stuff in plants, and I understand all that. But I'm just wondering, I see here that 25% answered both of those in a way. You know, network, well, the one on detection and response, I'll just say is 25%. The same as network security, which is another place where I see, you know, the new firewalls that are being used in IT and stuff are probably a lot more powerful. You know, a lot of them do deep packet inspection, and they go way beyond the application layer now, or just saying you can't come from this IP address. You know, that a lot of them are much deeper, and I even understand, you know, industrial protocols and stuff like that today. But a lot of plants aren't using them because they're used to not saying, well, we're just going to block it at the firewall or something. But do you see an advantage to kind of bringing that technology into your facility, either one of those, network security or the more sophisticated type of detection and response stuff? I don't know if I'm asking a good question. It was a long question. I don't know if I framed that very well.
As said, I can give it a go if you want. But I mean, to me, I would separate detection and response. I think that's one of the issues I have with, you know, those being lumped together, because from a response side, we definitely want convergence. We have a really robust SOC. We want to bring all that data together. It doesn't mean that we don't want to have the domain experts working there, right? So we have an OT security operations team, if I can call it that, fully embedded with our SOC. So we're using the same platform, the same data that helps facilitate effective collaboration, but we're bringing the domain expertise to that platform where it makes sense. So if it's the data related to our industrial environments, we want to make sure that people that are educated and understand those environments are the ones that are helping respond to those events and incidents.
Is that with the whole? Is the response side?
Yeah. From a response side, though, what I would say from a detection standpoint, though, if you look at IT, you know, we have a lot of we have high traffic volumes on the network. We have, you know, inconsistent traffic volumes, people going all over the place. It's encrypted. So, you know, really from a detection standpoint on the IT side, we really start to focus on the endpoint. But to do that in the OT world, it doesn't make any sense, right? So I always say our networks are sleepy. You know, there's nowhere near as much data on our OT networks that there is on the IT networks. It's very machine to machine, so you could kind of create a what good looks like model pretty easily, right? That you could use as your baseline. You also don't have encryption typically, so that's not a problem. So pulling, you know, passively network off the wire and using that for detection makes a whole lot of sense in the OT space. And to me, convergence there doesn't make sense. But when it comes to the response side, I think it very much does, right? So having those two lumped together to me is a bit of a challenge, because I see detection as something we don't want to converge on, at least not now. But response, absolutely, we want to see some convergence when it comes to technology platforms.
Anybody want to add anything to that or comment on that? I find it very helpful. But does anybody else? Do you all agree with kind of what Eric just said?
Yeah, my only point of disagreement probably is the deeper you get into the OT network, you start to find that the OT network is actually passing much more data than the IT network is, right? If you go down to the control signal layer, right, which if the attacks are going to go down to that layer, then the protection has to go down to that layer as well. So we're not there yet, right? But I understand your point, Eric. Yeah.
You're talking about to the instruments and things like
Well,
that.
the frequency of that data is high, right? But doesn't mean that the volume of that data is high, right? Because it's a small amount, small packets that we're talking about. Yeah.
What about? Go ahead.
I was just going to add one thing. The only thing that I would say is how many people are actually getting into our network, meaning third-party vendors, folks that are coming in and putting laptops on there. I'm not as concerned per se with the things that we install and we maintain. Obviously, I would want to have some visibility that, to that response and the detect to the level that makes sense for that plant. But I think more and more with how many third parties or even remote access or even other things that are coming in, external network connections, anything like that, that gives me a little bit more concerned of having just a little bit more visibility in some of these environments, depending upon, where you would place it and where you would be doing the detection at. That's the only add I would put in there.
Maybe I don't mean it to be off topic. It's just it led me into this question. Is that, one thing I don't see or hear much about in OT systems is network access control. Because generally, that's built and you don't come in. You only come in through one place and stuff like that. It's not the same as network access control when you walk into an office building or something, and you have to have privileges to connect and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of in the IT world, our clients or people I talk to, whatever company, networking company, that's a key element for them. And I don't see it being used in OT, but do you think that's going to start needing to be used? And I bring it up in the sense that that's another thing that can be detected there. Is someone trying to get in, like the thing in Florida yesterday, right? Was somebody trying to get in they shouldn't have. In that case, he probably had some way to get in. I don't know what happened there. But maybe if he had credentials, then he would have just gotten in anyhow. But that type of detection, and then the other thing they do in IT is the behavioral type of stuff, which you could argue is say that's the same thing as being done in OT by looking at, transmissions and how are they varying from what is expected and all that kind of stuff. That's behavior too, but it's a little different kind of an issue. But do you see a need, or is network access control something that you see coming into play? Because most systems don't, maybe you have it in some sense. I don't know where you stand. I could build a system and once I connect the devices, they're hardwired to networks in general. Everybody knows that PLC has that IP address. They don't have to log on to the network per se. Users have to log in, but do you have the devices logging in and stuff like that? Is that something that you see growing or need for? I realize I'm off topic a little bit. But.
See, I give it a go. I think with a lot of the old devices we have in our environment, it's just not an option, right? So
what?
A lot of the old devices we have in our environment, it's not really an option, to do network access control. We can have network segmentation and we put that in place, right? But we need smarter devices. And as we see smarter devices come in, that gives us the ability to start to move to more of a zero trust or applying, network access control. But, that's going to take years, I think, time before we have that full capability, rolled across our sites.
Even with the new platforms like the OPA, or I don't know what it's now called, Open Process Automation, that ExxonMobil's been pushing or supporting. I don't want to say pushing, I'll say supporting. There I just see more IT being put into that architecture, into that configuration. And some of those things I would think are now making, where I start to worry is where you have things, that have multiple ways to communicate. We're talking about 5G and communicating out cellular and all different ways to get information in. And it could be in one device, like, you know, my iPhone. I mean, you could be talking to, I can be talking on the phone through the cell system at the same time I'm connected to the network and all that kind of stuff. So it really complicates the paths. And I'm just wondering, as those devices come in, then I would think that maybe you need NAC. Now, I get your point. If you have devices there, that you're going to always have those devices there. They don't even have the capability to say who they are. I mean, you know, however that device would do it, yeah, then what's the point of it? But I'm just curious if you're going to see more of that, if you're going to see more need for that from a convergence.
Yes, I'd say
Okay.
I'd say the answer is yes, and I'd say as new kind of smarter devices come in the environment, we should be looking at how we're manage identities of those devices, and not just fall back on what we've done previously with all the old devices that didn't have support for certain capability, right? So I would say yes. I just still think it's going to take time.
Yeah, I raised it. I'm sorry for diverting the discussion, but I raised it because if you don't have NAC and then you can get, and the people do go in and connect stuff, you don't know they connected it. Maybe you do somehow, but then you need some other way. All of a sudden, if you have passive monitoring, might be.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, it's been a lot of the, even some of the, to Eric's point, the newer devices, and some of the, even some of the ones that are not as new can do some of that, but it's kind of, you have to be really kind of careful with that, because, you know, if that environment gets isolated and can't do any kind of the authentication that you require, or it doesn't fail to open or something like that, you may break a critical process. So it's a very surgical in your approach of how you do it, because you have to have, you know, survivability and reliability on top of that cybersecurity to kind of facilitate that. Because you know, just in an IT world, using things like .1x, if, you know, for port authentication, if you lose any kind of connectivity to that authenticating server or whatever, you know, basically you've brought down something in your IT world, and it's probably not going to impact safety or people's lives. So you got to be really careful, you know, in how you would design that and architect that and put that in there. And you'd have to, you know, obviously get everyone's kind of buy-in on what this means and what would happen if something failed.
Right, because of
That's
the
a
physical
very-
effects. Yeah, like Eric Cosman said yesterday, right? And I think he quoted someone else is, you know, number one priority is keep the joint running, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and when you're in the physical space, the OT space, the operations have to keep going, or they have to shut down safely, right? I mean, one or the other, you know, and even shutting down safely, yeah, it's safe, but it's going to cost you a lot of money, right? So,
You know, but this point that you just raised is, you know, and maybe we have the next poll question with respect to convergence. I was, you know, this one was which ones give the best opportunities. I think the next question is one on what's the obstacles, the biggest problems or something doing it. But that's one I suspect I did not put on that poll, but is one that is there, that the fact that you have an environment, you say, yeah, I would love to use all that new stuff. You know, there's a lot of reasons why people don't want to use some of the convention, I'll call it conventional IT, but I don't mean the, you know, the box that sits on my desk, you know, hardened and all that kind of stuff. But this more advanced kind of IT technology that's maybe built in a ruggedized version, they'd say, we'd love to use that, but we can't integrate it in because it has too much of an impact on what we would have to do with the rest of the stuff. And I think that's a very important constraint that I'm just raising. I find it very interesting. It's not something that usually comes up. It's usually people think it's just that their resistance to it, or it's too costly to buy the new equipment. You know, I mean, it's like, I don't know if a big decision would be made if somebody said, okay, I want to replace my firewalls with more advanced firewalls with additional features. You know, there is a cost to that. There would always be the argument, I'm sure, of saying, why change something that works? You know, it's like buying a new car. Well, when I tell my wife, she knows she likes to buy cars. We don't need a new car, you know, this is fine. But there's sometimes you say, that would be nice to have that. But in this case, the constraints would be so overwhelming, they're kind of hidden because the devices that are there wouldn't support the interface that it has, right? I'm just highlighting that. I find that a very interesting kind of constraint. It's much deeper. It's not just replacing the firewall. It's replacing all the things that might interact with the firewall. In some cases, the point you were making, Jared. At least I hope I'm reflecting that properly. A lot of them just can't support that. Okay, why don't we go to the next poll? I'm really enjoying this. I hope you guys aren't mind that we're being driven by this rather than these questions I said I've suggested. Let's see. Who is would like mostly who is or would you can read it, would likely be the most effective driver of IT-OT? This is the same answer we got yesterday. For those that watched it yesterday, you know, top management, which I don't know how to take that. Yeah, I mean, it's just, maybe that is in the end that everybody, maybe that's how the world is driven. I work in a small company, so, and the top management does make all the decisions. That's true. I have to be the first to say that. But I would think that there would still be champions, and that's what I meant by that question. But maybe that's, and what, you know, I use the word driver of IT and OT cybersecurity technology convergence.
Yeah, I think the key there is sponsorship of the convergence, so that they support it, so that you start to build an organization and you start to the teams can align to that. You know, you can certainly start something on the ground level and move up, but if you don't have any support from upper management, I don't see it happen. I think you really need corporate sponsorship.
Maybe the terminology I use, because that's what I meant by that question. That's why I said most effective driver of it. But and I know in your companies, just from yesterday's discussion and from other crews, there's like a difference between who's responsible and who's what's the word was used yesterday?
Accountable.
Accountable. Yeah, very precise, different thing. And you know, the RASI kind of chart stuff, where I'm looser with my terms, I guess. Well, does anybody see anything different there? I mean, that was like by far 50% of top management, and then IT and the CISO, but the OT, next highest actually is the OT cybersecurity leader, saying that OT would be driving more convergence more than the IT. I think it's often seen as being pushed down onto plants. Am I wrong? I hear people say that. This kind of says no, it's actually being pulled, though. You know, you got IT here and you have CISO, so if you add them together, that would be bigger.
Yeah, I think, well, I think this question would have looked a lot different if, you know, if you could take the same poll question and ask it, you know, every year, or, you know, go backwards 5 years, right? These answers would change. I think the industry has done a good job. I mean, everybody on the phone, as on the panel, but also, you know, the kind of supplier, you know, side of the OT cybersecurity industry has done a good job of making people aware of the risk, right? Of the idea that it's not an IT only responsibility to take care of cybersecurity. It's a reliability, it's a safety issue in the OT world. And so you have to be aware of it, and you know, where it's going to affect the reliability or potential safety of your asset, that's an OT responsibility, right? I mean, you've got to be accountable for that. And if you need to bring IT into it to help you solve that issue, then you got to do it. Now, that's the question, is how do you do it, right? I mean, there's still a lot of growth to go in making that. But, you know, to Jeff Lazik's point, if you don't have your VP of manufacturing or operations, whatever you call them, at the top stack of your, you know, kind of facilities that make product, and your CIO, the top leader of your IT organization, if they aren't in some agreement, at least, that they need to work together and organizations need to work together, then, you know, you'll have pockets of people who believe it's the right thing, but they'll constantly get swatted down from above saying, why are you doing that? We don't need to do that, right? We don't believe in that. So that's a good answer from my perspective. And it's interesting, it's so consistent with yesterday. So
let me throw in a different thing here. While everyone was answering, I apologize if I look like I'm not listening. I am trying to listen, but I wanted to look at the questions too. This is a question from the audience. I just thought it was an interesting question. It says the panelists all appear. You all can see it, by the way, if you click on your Q&A tab on your screens, you'll see the question. It's the first one, but for the people listening, it says the panelists all appear to come from process industry companies, which is true here, I think. Though we can talk about that, how they might just think it's a continuous refinery, and I know all of you have organizations or installations that are quite different than that. Do they think there's any significant differences in the cybersecurity solutions needed for discrete manufacturing equipment factories or companies? And so I'd like, hear what you got to say on that. But at the same time, I would just, you can mention if you like, but I would also mention to the person who asked it, yesterday it came up, and I've heard it many times and seen it myself. If you take a chemical industry, you have plants that do a whole variety of different things. There's packaging, there's all kinds of other things that are involved that are almost like discrete manufacturing. Now, I'm not asking you to comment. No, maybe if you can comment on automotive or something like that, if you have a background that spreads into other industries, please feel free to say it. But anyhow, I'll let you answer the question. Did everybody get to see that question?
Yep. Now, I imagine Jared has some input, given his background, but I've spent a fair amount of time over the last 6 or 7 years working with MXD in Chicago, and most of the membership there is discrete. They're DoD supply chain kind of companies,
Yes,
right? Caterpillar and Rolls-Royce and Lockheed Martin, and what we have found is the big principal items around cybersecurity programs are very, very similar. But how you actually execute them, what the technical challenges and even the cultural challenges are. I mean, it is much more about the supply chain, for a lot of those DoD suppliers, because, if you're Caterpillar or Rolls-Royce.
Supply chain or software supply chain, be clear.
No, the actual like engineering and parts supply chain, right? Because if you're Caterpillar, you're not building every part, right? What you're doing is you're building the engine or the compressor or whatever it is you build, and there's a bunch of pieces, specialized parts coming to you from small suppliers, small manufacturers. And there's a tremendous amount of potential risk there, right? From a cyber point of view, in terms of IP and potentially changing designs, but also just from disrupting that supply chain, right? So what I have discovered, at least in my view, is the chemical process industries have supply chain concerns, but it's a whole level of magnitude more on the discrete industry part, given all the parts and pieces that fly across their supply chain. Whereas cybersecurity as a safety issue is much more important to the process industries than it is to the discrete industries, because it's very difficult to imagine too much of a, it can happen, but, a kind of community or a citywide event like happened, in chemical plants, right? When there's a spill or a fire, right, happening in a discrete industry. So you've got different risk levels, different things you need to pay attention to. But I can tell you, a lot of the reason Dow has belonged to MXD is because we believe there's a lot of value in cross-pollinating right across the industry. So there's a lot of learning we can do, across industries.
What about Jeff Aiken? I'm just saying because BASF, it's a chemical company, but it's also, isn't BASF, I apologize if I'm wrong, but I thought BASF is the company that makes the things that other people use, whatever that.
We make a lot of stuff. Yeah, we make a lot of stuff. We make the things that make your stuff better, I guess.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, I would agree with Dan in that there needs to be a proper risk analysis to determine what the greatest factor is it safety, is it financial, IP, that sort of thing. But yeah, I think you're talking about somewhat two different things, but both affected by cybersecurity in its own magnitude.
And the same kind of issues. The emphasis might change, but you still have the same kind of issues to deal with. Is that what we're saying?
Well, with process and stuff like what we're dealing with, industry, you deal with the risk of life and limb, not just IP, not just finance, that sort of thing. So that depends on where your focus is. Where's your greatest risk?
Anybody else? Jared, do you have any comment?
No, I agree with both Dan and Jeff. I think the risk profile is what drives, what part of the cybersecurity aspect you're going to kind of, adhere to. But I don't think that the overall cybersecurity strategy or cybersecurity technology should be like dramatic. It's just what is the risk profile and how does that risk, is it risk to life? Is it risk to supply chain. You have to kind of mitigate that risk and account for that risk appropriately. But I think the cyber aspect of it is still applies. It's just, are you more risk averse to certain things within that cyber, event or cyber hardening and cyber value that you get, right? So that's going to drive you to how do you implement, or how are you going to, decide what cyber strategy or cyber governance or cyber technology you're going to kind of utilize out of that kind of that strata of things that you can. But I don't think, you can extrapolate those between the two environments. It's just, I think what everybody's trying to drive, that risk profile is going to determine the final kind of outcome for you as an organization.
Anybody else want to make a comment? I tend to comment too quick. I was going to make, I'll make my comment. The one thing I think is, when you see like an automobile factory or a company that's making machine parts or something like that, it's very discreet. It's kind of cellularized. You have manufacturing cells, so you have kind of a natural isolation and thing. But one thing I think we see, I may be wrong, and maybe the other analysts at ARC would correct me, but we see a lot more things like robots being put into plants. We see an extensive use, like I'll use Rockwell as an example. I mean, I went to Rockwell Fair last year, and one thing that caught my eye, it was not necessarily about cybersecurity, but they had all the demos. And one thing I saw that was very fascinating was the use of iPads extensively with things for augmented reality, where you might take an iPad and go to the real thing was a GE reactor for a pharmaceutical company, where you have to connect a bunch of hoses. It makes multiple things. And, they use the iPad, where you would go and hold the iPad over it with the camera, of course, and it would look at how the things were connected. And actually it would tell you if you did something wrong. They would show up in different colors and stuff like that. But that kind of integration, where you obviously are getting data from some business system somewhere into that device and using it to look at the physical device, somehow it's calibrating what it's looking at, it knows what it's trying to make and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think you see that. I may be wrong here. You might see it in maintenance in a refinery or a chemical plant. Certainly we see that kind of stuff coming up. But it's more of an extensive use of that type of technologies. I think these, mobile devices for those kind of things. I just think you see more of that, more robots and stuff like that. Even though they are used in the other industries, process industries, it may be more prevalent there. So I think that you still need the same security, though. In the end, you need endpoint protection, you need network security of some type. You might do something more like what I was talking about before with the NAC type stuff. You might, because you're going to be connecting stuff, moving stuff, you may be bouncing from network to network, that kind of stuff. Okay, you got to put that in, but it's not necessarily a difference in the security strategy. It's what you said, and that's what I have no problem with that.
Yeah, I was going to say, you mentioned a good point on the robots, and I think it also is to even the process, or manufacturing in general. Sensors, where are we putting them at? Where are they pulling data? Who's looking at the data? What is the actual consumer of that? I think that all plays a part in that, and then that's how you wrap your cybersecurity around that, and hopefully we get to a point where the strategies are aligned with each other, because at the end of the day, the IT and the OT world, we're all, in general, it's one company, right? So we don't want to introduce risk from one side of the fence to the other side of the fence, and we want to keep each other as protected and as safe as possible, depending on how we can create that alignment, that convergence.
So part of this might be as to how you implement the cybersecurity control. Yep. So, yeah, most of my background with the digital control systems and implementation has been for very large world scale continuous plants that don't shut down for 7 years. So a lot of those were designed with redundancy in mind. So if you take the example of Microsoft security patches, so we take a very careful approach. Number one, you want vendor approval. Number two, we bring them into a lab and then you test them there, because we've seen things where patches will blue screen a system depending on hardwares and drivers. Sometimes patches are out of order and don't apply right and they error out. After they get through that phase in the lab, you take them to a pilot in an engineering system. So again, being very careful, let that run for a few days. And then finally, with very strict procedures in a redundant system, you make sure all your services are running. You can apply the patches to one of the endpoints. You can do the reboot. You make sure all the services come back, and then you proceed on to the next node. So it may be in discrete, it's a little,
Yeah, in discrete, you may have multiple.
here, I'll say different because maybe there's opportunities to take equipment down where we don't normally see that in a continuous process.
Yeah, one comment I would make too is that, you know, and I've been throughout my career, like I come from the steel industry. That's where I started my career, steel and aluminum, the metals industry. And everybody says, oh, that's a process industry. And you don't know how many years I've spent at ARC actually arguing with people who had DCS systems on blast furnaces, and they thought that was the whole steel industry, where on my end was on the rolling mills and process lines, which are actually very discrete. You know, you take a coil or a slab and you move it, you process it, and you get to another slab. And nobody wants to shut down, everybody wants production, but if you have to stop something, you stop it, you fix it, and then you start up again, you know, where that's quite different than a chemical plant or a refinery where it's literally flowing through and you cannot stop it. Now, that is what a blast furnace is like. So maybe this issue more not process industries versus discrete industries, but continuous processes versus discrete processes. That's what I was trying to get to before. Like in chemicals, you have packaging systems and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, you probably have multiple lines and okay, you got to patch something, you shut down that line and they just use the other lines. Maybe, I don't know, it depends on the plant, of course. But anyhow, can we go to the next poll? Eddie, I think, when do you or would you expect to see convergence of IT and OT cybersecurity technologies in your company? This is the one that Dan made a comment about yesterday. We were talking before about, you know, it seems like everybody's done it already. You know, anyhow, 21% say they already have it. And again, we discussed this yesterday, and the issue is, what do you mean by convergence? And in a way, you know, it's kind of like my opening presentation. I was saying there's kind of three models. And I mean, I don't know where you stop, and wherever you stop, you could then converge, maybe. I don't know. But the 21% say they are converged. Within the next 18 months is 26, and within the next 3 years is 23. If you add those together, that's 70% of all the plants are going to be converged in 3 years. So I don't know.
All the companies, yeah. I mean, very consistent with what we heard yesterday. I mean, for those of us who worry about this from an industry point of view, it's really great news. But, you know, it does depend on the definition. And we all know, I mean, the reason we're having these kind of, and you guys are sponsoring this kind of discussion is there are still challenges, right? It's not, even if it's true that, you know, the 9 folks who answered, they already have a converged technology stack. I'm sure they're still suffering with challenges, right, of how to make that technology stack work effectively and you know, really across the IT-OT boundary. So,
and I think it also, how far are you going? What do you mean by converged, right? Maybe if you have a SOC, does that mean your SOC is running all your security in your place or not? No, I don't. Again, it depends on what you define as converged. Does anybody have another comment on that one, or you want me to go on?
Yeah, Sid, I think your models are really good, right? And I think on the model slide that you presented at the start of this, you talk about, you know, probably having a combination of all 3 of the models. And, you know, I think when people answer that, they probably have, you know, some people are probably thinking a combination, some people are probably thinking one specific model. But, you know, if you look at a combination, and then you could see higher numbers, right? Because I know for us, if I look at all 3 of those models and I combine them all, our numbers are going to definitely go up. So I don't know if people are thinking that. It's hard to interpret what people are thinking when they answer the question, but
maybe I should have asked, has your program gone as far as you want to with convergence? Maybe something like that, which is a different question. I understand, right? You might say, yes, we are at this point and we're on the process, but we aren't to where we want to go yet, and that may take a long time, probably more than 18 months, I would think. So, yeah. You want me to go on to the next question? We'll expire. Okay, down these questions for a minute. Okay, this one is, what is the biggest obstacle you face? That's what I was saying before we kind of were talking about that, I think. In converging your IT and OT cybersecurity technologies. Reconciling IT and OT views of acceptable changes and updates was the highest. And then overcoming OT aversion to solutions. I think that might be IT. People may say that, I don't know. That's kind of contrary to the one we saw earlier where it said the OT people were one of the initiators for the convergence, right? Of course, like I said, if you added the IT and the CISO and the IT, it's more. What do you think of these? Anybody want to comment on this? Or?
I was just going to look at this. This is about where I perceived things. I think I kind of read the reconcile IT and OT views of acceptable changes and updates. I kind of look at it. I'll reword it a little bit. I think it's trying to get the kind of the I's dotted and the T's crossed for decision rights and just making sure that, you know, we're aligned on in the direction and what's acceptable and what risk. I think that's the way I kind of look at that, not necessarily what's really, you know, I don't want to say obstacle like as a negative, but I think that's just making sure I think there's a want and a need to get there because of just the way that, you know, resources, financial, you know, the whole gambit is kind of coalescing now, and with COVID especially too, as well as I think during the keynote speeches, you know, you kind of heard what is the art of the possible kind of really came about with COVID. You know, the things that we wouldn't have done in the past, we kind of quickly drove towards to get value out of. And so I kind of read that too is in that answer, in that number that, you know, how do we come to an understanding and an agreement to better, you know, serve the corporation is kind of just getting that kind of crispness between the organizations, and hopefully it gets to a point where they're more kind of unified to what your slide shows. I think that's where how I kind of interpret that kind of answer towards that is just getting people aligned and clarity so that they can, you know, move forward. I think there's a real push for that, at least from what I've seen.
So it's almost like a people and process issues here.
Right. Yeah, I think
same kind of thing we just dealt with.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and sometimes it's not arguing over. Sometimes it is arguing over the widgets or the technology, but I think a lot of times people get really comfortable with the technology, but then you got to kind of say, what is that going to? How is that going to impact the plant or the process or the location? So I think that's where we get into the people and process, and that kind of couples into that, at least in my mind.
Anybody else have a comment?
Well, the number one answer is probably the number one discussion I have in our company.
Which one is the orange one?
The one that got the number one, reconciling the IT and OT views. So, you know, again, you look at the continuous processes that don't want to shut down for 7 years. And we know we need to implement cybersecurity controls, but again, it gets to how you do it and can you do it carefully. But there's also what I found, you know, so my focus was on one particular platform for 17 years, and now I've had the chance to branch out and do the other platforms in Dow. And you really have to sell how careful you were if they want to standardize on these new cybersecurity tools. They, you know, the other platforms,
we missed that. I'm sorry.
You know, some standard.
We missed that, Jeff. You zoned out for a moment there.
Oh, can you still hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay, so I got to remember where my train of thought was going.
I'm sorry. That's my problem.
The second platform. You were talking about the second platform.
Oh yeah, so right, when you look at the other platforms, there's not necessarily the standardization we had with one of our platforms. And when you talk about standardizing on these cybersecurity tools, you really have to sell the plants and the owners on how careful you were, you know, again, how you're screening these security patches, how you're, you know, screening them in the lab, you know, the vendor approves them. you're rolling them into a safe environment before you roll them out globally. And, part of that is if you don't do that and you have some mishaps, bad news travels fast. All right. So a lot of it is being very careful, building confidence. And once you start to build confidence, and we've seen this in our platforms, that you start to build confidence and people start to accept and they know that you're being very careful. So
let me ask about the one that's the real low one, the very first one. You hear that a lot. Are plants getting more that they're saying we don't have to be isolated? I mean, I talk to people a lot. You're not putting, that's the only way to protect is to completely block out everything. And you get the impression that end users believe that, and many do. And I think that is where it came from. I mean, that's the old issue, I think, with a lot of cybersecurity stuff. But that kind of tells me, I don't know how representative that is, but is that representative to you guys that you're willing to get rid of some of the isolation? It's not that it's strong isolation maybe is a bad way to phrase it. Maybe you're saying as long as it's proper isolation, proper access, if things are engineered right, we're willing to do it. Because they're saying that's the least concern, or the smallest obstacle.
Hey Sid, I kind of see that as, strong isolation's kind of table stakes, right? I mean, if you want to do certain things, you have to make sure you do it in a safe way. But I think people are recognizing value for connectivity and, all the way at the top of the house at our company, right? So I think people recognize the value. It doesn't mean you do it in insecure ways, but, a lot of times isolation, full isolation is just not practical for what we want to get done these days, right? So, maybe it's low because people recognize that we have to maybe not have full isolation or air gaps everywhere, but I think we still do need to have that strong isolation where it makes sense.
But it can be done in a way that allows, I mean, I don't forget about suppliers and everything here, but one is the only thing you can do is put in a data diode. I don't want anything coming in attitude. And I'm sure there's places where that's validated and the right answer, versus having a firewall and having the confidence that you have the right security around that in whatever that means for that thing, that's enough to protect it. And what you just said, and what I think this is saying, is that the OT world is at least just saying, listen, we understand it's just got to be done properly. Is that kind of how you'd phrase it? I mean, we're willing to let you to do more getting connected, but just make sure we do it in a safe way. So it might be more than just, it certainly is not putting in a VPN connection. It's kind of the IT, and I don't know how often you have to talk about that. That comes up with me a lot. Not that there's anything wrong with VPN, but it's really saying I've got a safe communication channel. It doesn't say anything about what's being communicated is right. Just it'll safely get there. That's important, but there's the other aspect to it too, right? I don't know if you get into that or not. But I find that interesting, and I think that's positive in a way that it's saying that the OT world is not as anti-connectivity as a lot of people might think. And the same thing, the one down at the bottom, this one surprised me because of the very last question. I mentioned this yesterday with the people and processes. It was also, I think I had the same question there, or same response. My experience from my background, which is a long time ago, to be honest, when I was working in the steel industry, but those managers would say, don't you touch anything. My job is to get tons out the door in the case of steel plants, and you're not allowed to change anything. And if it works, I'm going to run it till it breaks. That's exactly the attitude they have. And so getting someone to go in and say, I want to do something to converge these technologies for some other benefits, whatever they might be, that it would be hard to get them to support it. But apparently in this survey, it's not. Is that what you guys see too? It's not as much of a barrier as Sid Snitkin would have thought it was, I'll say.
Well, I was going to say towards this, I think it's not necessarily the relinquish part, but I think they've been willing to, there's a lot more prevalent cyber folks in the OT space to allow them to kind of delegate a little bit more. And so maybe the thought is that that's not really kind of a concern anymore, that they have to kind of be kind of really holding tight to that because they have good, solid cyber folks that they can count on in their environments at their plants, and working in those environments to kind of give them the thumbs up or the thumbs down so that they can, you know, delegate a little bit more. I think maybe that's a little bit of there in that space too.
Okay, can we have the last poll, Eddie? Okay, now how would you overcome these obstacles? Okay, and that was the obstacles we just talked about. And, you know, we just gave it kind of two different ways. One is establish a corporate IT-OT cybersecurity group that sets the standards for all the facilities, or establish a corporate IT-OT cybersecurity group to help facilities develop their own plans. I think maybe when I wrote this, to be honest, I developed the polls, you know. I might have been thinking that there was going to be a lot of reluctance on the part of the OT groups and the plants, complete opposite of what the previous poll told us. Here it's just saying establish a corporate IT-OT cybersecurity group that sets standards for all the facilities. So you guys are doing that, right? I mean, I know Ian mentioned that. I don't know if it was in his presentation or if I in the previous conversation I've had with him. But.
Yeah, so at BP, we have something we call the operating management system. So it governs all our operations and engineering. And we baked our OT security standards and policy into that, right? So the same framework that governs safety is where we have our OT cybersecurity controls that need to be adhered to as well. And, you know, so everyone in the OT environment is familiar with that and conforming to that when it comes to safety. And now they have to do the same for cybersecurity. And that's really been helpful to us. And that practice or policy, if you will, was written by, I guess, what you would call IT-OT as a cross functional group that put that together.
And that's I know, again, Ian made a comment to me that, you know, that was one of like 20 standards in BP that it was not like he had to negotiate all the time with the IT or about security. The company accepted that as one of the top level standards, and it's embedded in it. It's not just a cybersecurity standard, which is what Eric just said, but it was a standard that's already been, so it's not an option that you have to do certain things certain ways. It's just that's the way we operate. Do you guys have that in the other companies, in BASF? Or in
well, I think it talks to Sid. I mean, that was a great answer by Eric. I mean, I think it talks to not just having a group that establishes the standards, but how do you deliver those in a way that it's consumable, right? You know, by who you're trying to get it to, right? So you're not going after, you know, software developers and IT professionals. You're going after, you know, production managers and production leaders and, you know, maintenance leaders and, you know, process engineers and so and operators. So it's got to be part of how they run the plant, right? You know, which is what Eric talked about, and that is the way. It's not just having a team to come up with the standards, but then how do you deliver them in a way that people kind of accept them and make it part of their everyday life? And that's the people and process challenge, right? Not a technology challenge.
So I guess the managers, the operational managers, again, when I was in the steel industry, it was like every operational manager, every plant was managed by an independent person. He was like a god, because the business was structured like it's your responsibility to make money. That was it. And, you know, and if he wanted to trade off a little safety, a little risk in this or in that to make more money, it was kind of on his back. Where here you're saying, no, your job as an operational manager is to make money. I'm sure that's in the business, but this you have to do it given this. You can't do it in other. You have to meet this as well as make money. It's like a joint thing. Is that the same in Exxon, Eric?
I think that's one of the places where we're trying to get to. I think we have the desire to get there. It's getting to that point and getting to that maturity, but we're working towards that. I think that's one of our main focuses that we're trying to get to as an organization between IT and OT, is to get to that kind of that space, to that establishment, that corporate cybersecurity group that's delivering, a global kind of strategy so that the manufacturing locations, upstream locations, and aren't kind of off on islands by themselves. So I think we have some of that structure kind of built into the value chains already, but we're trying to bring that up a couple of levels all the way up to the global perspective. But I think our business lines have done a pretty good job, solid job, and we're always trying to improve that. And I think we're trying to get to that more global kind of group that we're talking about as the kind of what the top answer is. But that's where we're on the journey of. I think we're going to get there. It's just getting the mindset to get there and making sure that it adds value, and then we're not, to your point, creating where the plant manager is not able to make money. So I think we're trying to get there as best we can.
Isn't there just one, because it came up yesterday, the challenge in doing some of that, I think, when I say these managers just want to make money, they don't want to hurt anybody.
Oh yeah, no, safely make money. Yeah,
they
right.
want to be able to do it, but the problem is, and I would think it's one reason I wouldn't want to be in the group trying to set a standard is when you set that, all of a sudden you have to understand the ramifications. Like there may be equipment there that cannot possibly meet what you are asking to do, which would mean you'd have to replace the equipment. And so it must be a constant battle of trying to deal with those situations. You want to have something that is safe, but maybe if it's even defining, it must be awfully hard to do that. I don't know if you guys are involved in doing that specific activity, but I would think that would be one of the biggest challenges in putting together that kind of a standard, regardless of how it's embedded, whether it's into safety, how it's pushed down. But it's that you're always going to, anytime you put in a requirement, there's probably some exception that's out there, like the older equipment that we talked about earlier that causes problems if you want to do something like, NAC, or you want to put in encryption or something like that. It's easy for someone to say do it, but what's the ramifications?
Say we have controls, but then there's going to be exceptions to that or deviations, and then we look at compensating controls. All right, we have a deviation for this reason, so here's the compensating controls that we'll put in place to say that we're conformant, and that happens. But I think having that, that kind of global standard, this is what we expect is paramount, right? Because then you can handle deviations in an effective way. When you look at how you deliver security from a technology standpoint, it really just layers on top of what's already been agreed. And so if you come up with services or groups that can deliver technology, and you have a plant manager just says, I got to be conformant to this, give me that technology so I can do it. Now you can start to standardize your technology across the group as well.
Yeah, the other thing it lets you do is, if you go back to what kind of a site leader or plant managers, like you said, I mean, their job is,
Daniels. I'm joking.
Yeah, their job is to get the pounds out, right? I mean, that really is their job, and to do it safely and reliably. And but in today's age, right? I mean, part of the awareness they have to have is there is a reliability threat to their operations from cybersecurity risk, right? So once they accept that, then part of the discussion as you start rolling out standards and policies and procedures and embedding it in how they operate is they got to take that into account from a capital planning point of view or an expense planning point of view. So, I mean, historically, when you looked at a budget for a big, chemical plant, the very last thing they wanted to spend money on was upgrading a control system, unless they absolutely had to. If it wasn't working or wasn't doing something, I mean, that was the last thing they wanted to do, because that doesn't necessarily get you any pounds or any reliability or any capacity or yield, or, it might, but, but now what we've tried to do is take that conversation to say, you know what, that shouldn't be last. Maybe it's not first either, right? A new reactor that gives you more, capacity or yield, maybe the first thing on your list. But, kind of these technical debt upgrades, right? These things where you've got old systems or you've got to make some changes and you've put compensating controls in place, but there is some technical control, some firmer controls that you can build into the technology, right? Let's start moving those up and get more balanced in terms of, how you're investing in that plant, right? And they've got to see the value in it, right? But, I think we're winning some of those arguments now. And so you're seeing it show up in some of their budgets, which is a place that's got to show up, not just how you operate, but how you invest, right, year to year.
Okay, we can be done with that poll. Let me just ask one more question. It's already 4:40, which is fine. Hopefully you guys can hang around here. Like I said, we kind of left till 5 if we wanted. I'm not going to force you to sit here, but hopefully you're enjoying this. But no, it's this issue of COVID. Everybody talks about it, everybody brings it up, but I'm wondering from a technology point of view, if that had much of an impact on maybe did you have to do anything with the technology? Do you see, is it changing the technology you're going to be using for security in this case again? Does that have major impact, or was you pretty much ready for that because you already had remote access? I mean, I saw the thing with Exxon this morning. Partly, I was in the middle of doing something else, to be honest, but and I saw where it was the point of that it pushed them to go further, to say, okay, there were boundaries there, but to maybe test those boundaries more. The COVID forced it. But did that have much impact on what you're doing with security technologies? Because now, when you do that, obviously you're opening it up. So, who would like to start with that one?
I guess I would comment that we talked about our chaperoned remote access solution, and that was primarily designed and the permissions were given for support personnel to use that. And we did have cases during plant startups where, more and more people found out about the solution. So you wanted your plant engineers using it. And with the way we have it designed, we were able to grant that permission for a limited period of time during the startup and then take it away at some later point. So, I mean, it did force us to start opening these things up to other groups because of COVID and to still allow the startups to happen.
What about Cisco happens to be a client of mine. I'm not promoting anybody here, but just as an example, they have a lot of technology, and certainly remote access was a boom for them this year in a way because of the drive for that. But, one of the issues there is, now you also have to worry about the technology they're using on their end when they come in. One thing is to look at your end. Now you got to worry about them. And I'm just wondering, did you end up having to add those kind of issues? And the other thing you just said, Jeff, was more, okay, you'd had to do it. It was a temporary fix, where what I heard this morning from Exxon was more, no, that's pushed the limits. So now you're going to be doing more, not everything, but it's kind of said, what more can we do with it? Which is kind of saying, how can we push that a little further? Which I think then opens it up to all these other issues of threats. It's kind of in my little pitch on yesterday, not pitch, or my presentation. And I was talking how I see OT cybersecurity, which used to be, my job is to keep that plant protected, keep the bad guys out. And that's kind of true, point. But now, if the bad guy, now you say I'm going to enable a remote person to get in for whatever that purpose is. Now you've kind of extended the responsibility of OT in a way out to dealing with that device, that person, those privileges, making sure that you actually manage the privileges. That's a classic thing I hear is, yeah, you put in privileges, you say, here's your password, and nobody, and the guy leaves, in 5 years, he's gone, it's still in the system, that kind of stuff. But you have to be more stringent about that. You see that happening? Or?
Well, I'll say when we work with our vendors to work on support solutions, we've always done it this way. So again, you kick off your chaperone remote access with your internal Dow person that's on the Dow network talking to your plant person. Then if we have to bring the vendor in, we'll share that session out through a WebEx or Microsoft Teams or that sort of thing. So we're still interacting with them. You're still watching what they're doing. You still have the plant person on the inside, being careful about what's being done so that it's, being done safely. So, so we continue to leverage that. I don't think that really changed for us. Now, I don't see us getting to the point where we're just going to allow the vendor to get into the system at any time, but.
What about anybody else?
It's definitely an area that we were looking to improve, or always looking to improve anyway, right? So part of the company's strategy. We want to move to more autonomy in the way our assets work. And we talked about robots earlier. We're using robots out on our rigs today, which is testing those for manual inspections. But I think autonomy is important. So remote access is kind of key. I think COVID just helped accelerate, maybe how we look at improving things there and improving the security there. Not just because of where we're driving, but we also know a lot of the bad guys are looking at that now too, right? They know everyone's remote. And so they're going to start to really start to try to exploit that a lot more. And so what we have in place, we have to make sure that it's robust and it's fit for purpose. And, I think COVID's really made us look at that a lot closer. And it's going to help us though in the long run, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. I'd extend that to, not just remote access, but mobility or connected worker. And when I think of remote access too, it's, somebody in the plant, you can't have a third party come on site. How do you get something on the plant to get the vendor to see it, whether that's through a camera phone or whatever the solution may be tactically or strategically. You have to make sure, I think what it says is this may be the art of the possible, but we also have to think about how do we harden it, secure it, make sure that it's, that we can continue, because it may become the new norm, right? Especially if it saves the company or even just the plant by themselves large or amounts of or money that that can be kind of quantified, right? And get some hard credits on that. So I think that all of these things have lent themselves to make sure that we're not just leaving kind of these open risks or open gaps in the cybersecurity to resolve a problem in the moment, but could be a problem that we solve for the long term, to where we're not paying for large amounts of travel for vendors or ourselves to go to these locations.
Let me throw in a follow-up to that, just the same question, because one of the things I have been thinking is when I'm a big proponent for the IT-OT Cybersecurity Convergence. And one thing that I think is true is when it comes to like the remote access, I think that IT groups have been dealing with that extensively for years, just by the nature of IT systems and the distribution of stuff. And there seems to be a lot of technology there with respect to, centralized management of privileges, all that kind of stuff that you would do to make sure you manage things quickly, you detect people who are funny, behavior. And there's a lot of technology in the IT space for managing that issue of people getting into the system. It's had to be there. And I'm just wondering if that's something that maybe is an opportunity where IT and OT can converge, in the sense of maybe that last picture of what I was showing on my slide, where I had this thing when I was writing something recently where I was even saying maybe one way it should be viewed is, and maybe you're already doing this though, it's just my simple mind thinking, but is, one thing is to say, I'm a plant and I'm going to give you a firewall, I'm going to add a firewall and you come into my plant. That's nothing to do with the IT system, okay? So when you do that, that plant has to make sure they put in whatever extra work there to make sure that's secure to come in, okay? For that person to get in. Another approach is you say, no, I'm going to take my plant and I'm going to, from a remote access perspective, and in a way encapsulate it within the IT that we have, our IT system. So you get all the benefits of all the kind of technology and all the management of privileges that would be in IT to get into the plant. You're kind of going through the IT system to get to the OT system, so that you don't have to duplicate. You get what I'm saying? A picture would be better. I'm just wondering, that would seem to me that would be a nice opportunity, because I just see, again, when I look at the technology and the products and suppliers that talk to me and things, when I talk to the ones who come from the IT, it seems to be much more sophisticated for that issue than when I talk to the OT, who are trying to solve a specific issue. Okay, I'll stop talking.
I was going to say that I think that that's a great example of leveraging a technology stack that may be fit for purpose to accommodate a use case or a need in the OT space that doesn't require duplication and replication of infrastructure and dollars spent out the door. And some of the, and that allows you, if you kind of piggyback on that to kind of do other convergence as well as there to make sure that they understand of, you know, the risk that's in those environments that you need to be accountable for, and just how you kind of design that, you know, privileged ID access. We're doing some of that here to see if there's the potential to leverage those kind of technologies in a greater extent to, like I said, continuous improvement. We have some robust remote access capabilities, but is there ways of hardening that to even more? And IT is already paying for it, so therefore, why not utilize it if it is fit for purpose and fit for risk and is not going to will do no harm to the OT environment, and that allows you to do the things that you need to do. And I think that's one of the things that we are looking at from a strategy. It may not pan out, hopefully it does, but I think that's a great example of where you know that why duplicate infrastructure and applications and resources where it's already being accomplished.
That's where I was coming from when I asked the question. And I would think there's a big opportunity. And then in my mind too, there's nothing that says you can't also do other things within the OT.
Absolutely.
Jeff said, but you can always still say, well, we're going to do it through chaperones. Okay, but that doesn't mean you have to duplicate all the other type of access control and things like that. Anybody else have a comment on that? I know it's Dan, we just lost Dan here for a minute. I don't know, maybe another Amazon truck. He might buy a lot from Amazon. I don't know. He's back. Did you get another Amazon truck there?
No, just getting near the end. So I'm starting to get other pings. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyhow, that was my last question. So, you know, before this, it's funny, Andy this morning, and Andy Chata, when he did his keynote, I noticed when he had a panel discussion at the end, he says, would everybody please, usually if we were live, I'd say, okay, would you join me in thanking the audience, you know, with an applause? And I realized I didn't do that yesterday, so I applaud you guys. You did a wonderful job. And I didn't have the time where I was going to find something, you know, like on the super, you know, in the shows now on TV, you hear the applause, even though there's nobody there. So I was going to do that, but I didn't do that. So anyhow, I really want to thank you guys. I thought this was good. I hope you enjoyed it. I think the comments were excellent. I mean, help me. You're going to help me. You're going to see it in my writing, I'm sure. I'm a great thief of other people's ideas, so you'll probably see it reflected in that kind of stuff. So with that said, and I want to just mention something to the people who are listening in the end. If I didn't get to your questions, and I didn't, I see there's still some questions there. I'll be posting those in the chat room. I would appreciate if you guys would look at the chat room after the fact. The one thing, just a hint, when you go to look in the chat room, look for the ones posted by Snitkin, because I'm going to post these, but I'm the one posting them, so these questions all show up under my name. Okay, I'll put in there who asked it if I know who that is. So I'd appreciate if you'd look at that and make your own comments, and you know, look at the other ones. And if you have a question for each other or a question for other people, just feel free and post it. So anyhow, I want to thank you guys again, and that'll be it. Eddie, I think you can knock it off now. You guys can leave. So
Thanks,
have a great day. Take care.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoy the rest of the event.
Indeed.
I know.
We'll see you. Bye.
Bye.